And everybody wants to know how you can eat the most and lose the most amount of body fat. To optimize the metabolism and insulin sensitivity, we have to make sure that we are reducing systemic inflammation as a whole in every way that we possibly can. When you're setting up yourself for a carb or macro cycle breakdown throughout the week, you have to go from the beginning to the middle to the end. Now, you cannot predict. You can never write out a plan and a program weeks and weeks in advance because the body will adapt. There is metabolic adaptation that you have to know how to navigate before you almost even get to that point. On these refeeds, when I structure them, essentially what I do is I watch for those algorithms. Like I said, I'm taking the person's morning fasted weight every day. On the refeed day, of course, we're taking fasted weight. We're taking weight possibly after meal 5, and we're taking weight again pre-bed. I mean, listen, sometimes when you're really, really lean, on those high days, you may actually get very, very sleepy because if you've been in a deficit for a long time and had these glucose levels basically holding steady throughout the day, and now you're getting these spikes, even if it comes down to a really good level postprandial, you'll be pretty sleepy. I mean, that's kind of the nature of the beast. Welcome, champions. I'm AJ Sims, also known as the Cement Factory. On today's episode, I'm going to be diving more into Refeed supersaturation days in this part 2 of the series on dietary adherency, fat loss, optimization. How do you go about it in a successful manner? And diving more into some of my protocols personally, how I attack them, how I foresee different things coming up with said athlete and client, and how we're able to adjust, pivot, and move forward to optimizing their metabolism and fat loss in the best way possible. Stay tuned, guys. I know you guys have been waiting on part 2. You're not gonna wanna miss this. All right, guys, like I said in the intro, welcome to part 2. We're diving more into Refeed supersaturation days, all the fun stuff that you guys want to know about. Everybody loves carbs. Everybody loves food for the most part. And everybody wants to know how you can eat the most and lose the most amount of body fat. Now, they don't always work hand in hand synergistically, coincide over long periods of time, meaning you can't constantly be in a surplus, of course, and lose body fat. We know that is a law of thermodynamics, calories in, calories out. You can argue about it, but it's tried, tested, and proven over many, many years. But the big question is, the $1 million question that everybody wants to know. I get questions in my DM box every single day with this. It's the same question: is how do you get your guys to eat so much and get in such great condition? And the answer is not short. It's not easy because it's a long process. And I start with the baseline of the client or athlete that comes to me, find out, of course, what they've been doing, where they came from, and where we're trying to go. After that, of course, I dive deep into extensive lab works, sometimes methylation test, also food safe allergy sensitivity test as well is very important because we want to make sure to optimize the metabolism and insulin sensitivity. We have to make sure that we are reducing systemic inflammation as a whole in every way that we possibly can. From there, of course, we need to find out what their rest recovery is, how is their sleep quality, how is their overall gut health, like I said, how is the hormonal function on the endocrine system, from thyroid functionality, all the way from TSH, T3, free total T3, T4, reverse T3, very, very important key aspect right there. How does everything flow from an estrogen to testosterone ratio perspective? And once we make sure that at baseline internally they're functioning, they're firing on all cylinders, from there we can build the program and we can build it to optimize their basal metabolic rate and really, really build this metabolism up so they turn into a fat burning machine, quote unquote. Now I'm shooting this at the end of, close to the end of August. And of course, I have clients all over the world and everybody has a different goal. Everybody's shooting for something different. Obviously, we know when it comes down to competitors, from an aesthetic physique standpoint, the goal is always the same: to be as lean as possible, dry as possible, retain and maintain as much muscle tissue as you possibly can so that going into your physique contest, you have that round, full pop, healthy look to the muscle. It's vibrant when you pose it. But how do we get there? How do we navigate all those things? So as I'm recording this, I currently have a client that is 1 week out from the North Americans. He came to me 8 weeks out, 8 or 9 weeks out in a what I call rush preps, taking over his past coach's contest prep layout. And when this individual came to me, he was severely under eating and severely overtraining to an extent of doing too much cardio. And his body was basically shutting down. And I told him, listen, if we do all things right, we can reverse this within a couple weeks. Now, blood work was pulled. Everything looked like it needed to look. Everything was looking pretty optimal. So I knew just basically getting his body out of this hole, because it does come down to not only fatigue management, which is a hot topic today, it's a hot word today, but it comes from really under eating for long periods of time, where your body simply will go into preservation mode. You will have downregulation of T4 to T3 conversion. Reverse T3 will go up, which binds up that conversion even more. And then we're going to have all sorts of issues, from sleep disturbances, which we know when you don't sleep, ghrelin, hunger hormone, the hormone that stimulates hunger, is going up. Insulin sensitivity typically always is dysregulated, and that's going down. So you're pulling higher fasted blood glucose. You're getting into all sorts of issues, spinning your wheels, killing yourself, and nothing really is happening. And what you'll find more times than not is you're actually looking worse and worse and worse despite all your efforts. And of course, we know that when people are very hungry, they tend to lean more towards higher sodium intake to help with palatability of the foods. Plus, they're just craving more electrolytes because of the depleted state of glycogen that they're in. And also all of the energy output and sweat coming through all the cardio and the hard training. On top of that, using different type of fat burners and stimulants and thyroid enhancers. But we're having all these issues that are happening. The body's basically just shutting down. It's not optimizing itself. So I digress. We basically reversed this out. And at this point of filming, about one week out, he is doing next to no cardio, down from 2 hours of cardio, essentially. And his caloric intake has doubled over time, eating multiple refeed days of the amount of carbs he basically could never fathom eating, getting into the greatest condition of his life. So this is something that is doable, it's feasible, but it takes a lot of effort to do it and a lot of data collecting. So you have to learn the algorithm of the body, how the body responds to the type of foods, the amount of foods, so on and so forth. So when you're setting up yourself for a carb or macro cycle breakdown throughout the week, you have to go from the beginning to the middle to the end. Now, you cannot predict. You can never write out a plan and a program weeks and weeks in advance, because the body will adapt. There is metabolic adaptation that you have to know how to navigate before you almost even get to that point, which is why when I prep athletes or I'm getting a client ready for an event or a photo shoot, once we get to about 4 to 6 weeks out range, I'm having them check in every day, and then we go into check-ins 2 times a day, and then we go into check-ins 3 times a day, and we're tracking weight, we're tracking look, we're tracking the best weight to look ratio so that we can find that sweet spot of the amount of food that their body is responding to. Now, you guys know I love the word supersaturation, been saying it for years. And it's a term that I came up with because I'm an advocate and a huge believer in oversaturation of glycogen storage. As we know scientifically that muscle glycogen can only handle so much before it spills into liver, and then therefore can spill into basically putting on some adipose tissue, which, believe me when I tell you, is very hard to even do in a 1 to 2 day time frame of a refeed, especially when you're coming out of a deficit, especially when your total daily energy expenditure is so high. And on top of that, you're probably using some sort of supplement or pharmacology to be able to speed up the fat loss, lipolysis, and all of these other variables. So essentially, when I set this up, what I want to do is find someone's sweet spot, and then I overshoot that sweet spot. And then I find the algorithm of the body and how long it takes to reach back down to baseline. Now, On paper, many would say your overall weekly caloric intake needs to be at a deficit for fat loss. I get it, makes sense on paper. However, you guys know one of my most favorite sayings: bodybuilding and fat loss and physique and aesthetic building, all these things, however you want to put it, doesn't always make sense. And it doesn't have to. What needs to make sense is what works for you. And it works until it no longer works. And then you got to pivot, and then you got to find out what works next. So essentially what I'm saying is you must find out what works for you. You can't just go on all the rhetoric of 1 gram a pound per lean body mass of protein, or 0.8 or 0.3 grams of fat per pound of lean body mass, or 1 to 1.5 grams of carbs per pound of lean body mass. These ratios will change as you have metabolic adaptation, and basal metabolic rate either goes up or goes down, which is essentially your resting metabolic rate, which is essentially the majority of your caloric expenditure throughout the entirety of the day will be at rest. So we want to make sure that we're increasing this activity internally within the body. We want to optimize this. We want to be able to pick this up at the highest rate possible. Now, everybody's intake of carbohydrates on these refeed supersaturation days are going to vary. You must, again, find out your sweet spot and then understand how to overshoot it, and then understand the algorithm of how long it takes you to return back to baseline. How many days in a deficit, and or even at maintenance, or how much cardio does it take, or steps, or training days in a row post refeed, post supersaturation day. Now you put that data, collect it with your quality of sleep, your overall gut health, your stress levels as well, because that is going to be a huge factor. We know when you're in a constant stressed out state, a sympathetic nervous state, that you are in fight or flight, and we're going to have all sorts of issues, starting with the vagal nerve, which is basically controlling that, into the gut health, and it's changing your GI health, causing inflammation all over, dysregulating, insulin sensitivity, cortisol's through the roof, you're retaining fluids, you're stressed out, your joints hurt, you have no motivation because dopamine, the neuromodulator, has now downregulated too. And now we have all these cascading effects and issues. So all these things need to be controlled. And I tell my guys, listen, keep a journal. Keep a simple journal and note things down. You know, you guys love logbooks in the gym, weight sets, reps, cool. But you need to be journaling what happened that day with sleep, with your fluid intake, sodium intake, stress, appetite. You know, how was your appetite today? How was your digestion? How many times were you using the restroom? How are your bowel movements? All this type of data, when you collect it and you do it consistently over time, man, does it become a lot easier to read what I call the matrix, essentially, the algorithm of somebody's body. And then you're really able to hone in on these refeed supersaturation days. So getting back, after I digressed for a very long time, to this said client, we were able to do that successfully. And essentially now leading into the show, he is above maintenance of where he was, doing next to no cardio. Fat burners have been reduced over 50%, and he's literally just burning through food like no tomorrow. We've controlled all the systemic inflammation. We've increased different modalities: cold therapy, cold plunges, cold immersion, infrared sauna, doing lymphatic drainage. All these things are going to help this said individual reduce a lot of systemic inflammation that he had, in stress and oxidative stress, through the contest prep and through the stress that just essentially it will put on your body. That goes for everyday people too. When you're at a deficit and you're doing a lot of total daily energy output, you're doing a lot of activity, you're putting your body under stress, and then training hard on top of that, going to failure. Oxidative stress is building up, and that messes with you neurologically. Mitochondrial health, which, you know, of course, I'm going to get into on the next podcast. How do we optimize mitochondrial health and neurological health, and how important that is in a contest prep, in a fat loss phase? I mean, it's important year round, but it's something that people are learning to dive deeper into, the understanding on how you can optimize brain functionality during a deficit, during a fat loss phase. So on these refeeds, when I structure them, essentially what I do is I watch for those algorithms. Like I said, I'm taking the person's morning fasted weight every day. On the refeed day, of course, we're taking fasted weight. We're taking weight possibly after meal 5, and we're taking weight again pre-bed. Then we see how their body naturally flushes out overnight. Now, typically, more carbohydrates are going to reduce cortisol at night, increase serotonin. The person's getting way better sleep, and way better sleep is going to enhance lipolysis. It's going to enhance fat loss. It's going to enhance a drier look to your physique. So, all these things start flowing together when you're setting up yourself in this successful manner. Now, from the beginning, when you have higher body fat, there is really no need to do this. You need to get down to a specific level of body fat. Now, typically, if you want to put a number on it, on a DEXA scan, 10, 11%, I think, would suffice. Everybody's a little bit different with their distribution of body fat. There's guys that can have striated glutes, and from the front, they look completely out of shape. So, well-distributed body fat all over, you're going to know exactly when it's time to pull the trigger on a refeed or a supersaturation day, and you can see how you're progressing in your fat loss so that you know progression is constant and consistent over time, over weeks, over months. And then, of course, gauging how far are you out from your set event, from the photo shoot, from the vacation, from the competition. Then you can time how much you go above baseline, hold at baseline. Sometimes people will drop below baseline, but more oftentimes than not on a supersaturation, we're shooting up anywhere between 2 to 6 pounds. Now, we're talking a lot of glycogen loaded. We're talking about water retention that is, of course, spilled into the subcutaneous layer. Have no issues with this because the person is going to have a phenomenal training session, typically that will last 48 to 72 hours. So that's why I love supersaturation days. Plus, we got this huge boost in dopamine. They're pumped, they're amped, they're ready to give everything they got, like I said, over the course of the next 2 to 3, sometimes 4 days, where we can really induce lipolysis to its highest extent during that time. And we can push because not only are they refreshed, refueled from a physical fatigue standpoint, but a psychological, neurological, neuromodulator, dopaminergic system standpoint, these people are ready to go. So this is why I love to cycle this type of diet. Now, you may say, well, how much are you eating? How much do I need to eat? Well, you simply, when you start out on these refeed days, you can shoot from anywhere between 2 to 3 grams of carbs per pound of lean body mass. Now, again, you'll go back and say, well, you basically just contradicted yourself because you were talking about how numbers are almost irrelevant. I didn't say they were irrelevant, so don't hear what I'm not saying. What I'm saying is on paper, things won't always make sense. So you see a lot of rhetoric online, you see a lot of studies online, and I'm not negating controlled, randomized tests. What I'm saying is no one's done a controlled, randomized test long-term on people that are at low levels of body fat, that are training as hard as these people, that are doing this amount of total daily energy expenditure, that's following them through this, that could be also enhanced as well on performance enhancers, and not knowing what type of other supplementation they are inducing into their day. So we don't necessarily know exactly what it should look like on paper. Now, that may ruffle some feathers, but if you can prove me otherwise, especially when it comes to bigger physiques that are really lean and shredded at 250 pounds, please let me know. I have yet to see them. So I digress yet again. So we have to find the amount of carbohydrates that are working for you from the beginning and then overshoot that. So, like I was saying, we could look at 2 grams of carbs per pound of lean body mass, and we'll overshoot that by another gram to 2 grams. We could be up to 4 grams. So if you're a 200-pound male, we're eating upwards to 800 grams of carbs on your first supersaturation day. Now, my goal is always to build that as high as we can. Doesn't always happen, but if we did our homework, if we did everything correctly, if we're controlling all variables, like I said, sleep, stress management, getting constant blood work, looking at all the markers, the person trains hard, they're doing everything they can to adhere as close to 100% as possible, if not 100%. Champions mentality, bodies flowing, we are picking up on all the biofeedback we need to. We will eventually build that up to 1,000, 12, 15 to 2,000, and we are regulating blood glucose very well postprandial meal with postprandial meal walks. We're utilizing things like Ceylon cinnamon. We're utilizing things like berberine. And, people will say, well, you got to be using some form of insulin. Not always the case. We are building up someone's natural insulin sensitivity where they're able to handle and partition these carbohydrates through all these other modalities before you should even look into even touching those things. So, disclaimer, I am definitely not promoting the usage of it. Don't hear what I'm not saying. We want to build up the body's natural ability to control glucose, utilize postprandial meal walks, have that individual training hard enough, and being able to regulate blood glucose. Of course, we are checking their HbA1c on blood work, but we're also looking at acute measures of fasted blood glucose and postprandial meal blood glucose. Postprandial just means about 1 hour to 1.5 hours post-meal, and how that glucose is regulating and your body's adapting to how your body's functioning and partitioning the carbohydrates correctly. Or if we're having issues of pulling too high postprandial glucose, it's not regulating, then we know that we need to pivot and make some changes. So the goal again on these days is to really, really supersaturate glycogen storages and then get back into where we need to really burn fat and induce lipolysis to the max output for an extended period of time. Now, refeeds can become more frequent and they can become more intense the leaner that you get. Again, this is with all data collecting and reading the algorithm of your body's response on the post-refeed day, 48 hours post-refeed, 72 hours post-refeed, so on and so forth, throughout the week. So that's how I really navigate it. There's not one set answer or blanket answer for how you approach it. Now, there are some rules that I do go by. I do not add fats to my refeed days, usually. Now, if the person is humming through the food, just a crazy metabolism, we can't hold on to them. We will then add foods that are higher in calories and very, very dense overall. So we may utilize foods naturally that have a higher fat count. If we're eating sushi, maybe we add in some salmon. Maybe we're adding in some more red meat. Maybe we're adding in some dirtier foods. Maybe they're going out for grass-fed burgers or homemade grass-fed burgers, or any type of food that I know is going to make it stick. You guys remember carrot cake technology? Been doing that since 2005, since I was 15 years old. So it's been around for quite some time. We're coming up to the anniversary soon of carrot cake technology beginning. So we're using very high, dense caloric foods in that process, but I'm not adding in nut butters and olive oils and anything like that throughout the day because I want to be focused and fixated on carbohydrates, protein being down-regulated on those days, not only because you just don't need it at that point on these days, but because we want to speed up gastric emptying. I want to make sure that on these high days, my guys are hungry. And I ask them a lot, and they're like, dude, I'm not going to lie. And I'm like, I don't want you to lie. I want you to be hungry. That means that things are firing. Typically, not always, but typically there's a correlation to that signal of ghrelin, leptin, really being hungry, and your metabolism flying along with insulin sensitivity. Not always, but usually there is a synergy between all of them, and that just means we are rolling, we are churning. Not to touch on the fact that digestion is optimal in that case as well. Because let's face it, if digestion is off, you're not going to be hungry. So now we know everything's optimized. Now we know we're running efficiently. We are a Ferrari, a fine, well-oiled machine. And now we're successfully integrating refeeds and supersaturation days on a weekly basis. And then from there, you have to see if your body can handle 2 times a week. And you see what the amount of frequent refeeds you can add in without halting fat loss and lipolysis. And then you build your data from 2 refeeds. And this is where it can change a lot. But again, data collection every single day, not letting the scale dictate everything, but definitely being a gauge. But of course, body composition, biofeedback markers such as sleep quality improving, pumps, energy, strength in the gym. I mean, listen, sometimes when you're really, really lean, on those high days, you may actually get very, very sleepy because if you've been in a deficit for a long time and had these glucose levels basically holding steady throughout the day, and now you're getting these spikes, even if it comes down to a really good level postprandial, you'll be pretty sleepy. I mean, that's kind of the nature of the beast. But you still will have a lot more get up and go throughout the day than you typically would on your maintenance or deficit days. So we want to utilize that. We want to utilize that. And then we get into other variables of, what days do you refeed on? Listen, if you're very, very, very lean and you're digging yourself into a hole that you're having a hard time getting out of, you can go to refeed days on off days. So then it's really, really available. So it's really being utilized properly, and you're not just getting into a lipolytic burning where you're just running through the carbohydrates via the total daily energy expenditure. So now we're really saturating glycogen, and then tomorrow the availability and capacity of your fuel tank, quote unquote, is basically going to be very, very optimized, and that should bring you out of that hole. Sometimes there's a 48-hour one that's needed with 2 days off in a row. Again, bodybuilding on paper, fat loss on paper doesn't always make sense when you are so optimized and everything is running as efficiently as possible. So that's just a quick, brief overview of Refeeds Part 2. Guys, if you have any specifics, leave a comment below in the comment section. Make sure you like and subscribe and hit that bell notification next time, because I'm putting out content constantly on a weekly basis. I'm pumped. I'm excited. Refeed days are incredible, and they can be enjoyed when you know how to diet. And they can not only be enjoyed, they can be utilized as one of the best tools in your proverbial toolbox to optimize fat loss. I'm AJ Sims. That's a full churn. God bless. I'll talk to you guys soon in the next video.